gives me great pleasure, and I'm honored to introduce to you Laura Tsutsui.
Hello. So I realize this is different. You're looking here and then there, and we're just going to make this work however it works. But hi guys, I also can't see quite the notes that I made on these slides. I wanted to make them minimal so that you weren't just reading my slides, but you're actually listening, and we'll just see how it goes. So thank you all for being here. I know you probably kind of have to be here, but that's okay. I appreciate it. So as Ms. Orgill said, also thank you Ms. Orgill and Ms. Spongberg for inviting me. I know I could probably call you by your first names, but I can't. It just doesn't quite sit right. But so I'm a reporter, and that means that I go around and I ask people what is going on. Sometimes people send me emails to say this is what's going on, but then I need more information, and then I try to synthesize that for the world at large. So basically, I am literally a communicator all day long, day in and day out. I ask people questions, they tell me information, then I try to write it, and then I try to tell my editor, and then she asks me more questions, and then I have to turn around and ask those same people different questions. So I figured, well, this is a good lifelong skill that we all need to know, right? And so I figured that would be this presentation, partly suggested by Ms. Spongberg, so thank you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And why do we ask questions? Okay, so this is going to be sort of interactive. Why do you guys ask questions? Tell me, what are the situations in which you need information? And just yell it out. Or I'm going to pick you. You, why do you ask questions?
To know more.
To know more, okay. What's the situation in which you ask questions?
What's the homework?
What's the homework? Perfect.
Like when you need to know something?
Okay. Who are you asking questions of on occasion? Maybe outside of school.
My parents.
Your parents, great. What about you?
My friends.
Friends? Teachers? Google, great. The internet, sure. Yeah, okay, cool, that was fun. So we are constantly seeking information, right? Whether it's, I need to read this, but I don't want to read it, so I'm just gonna ask Google really quick, who won the Civil War? Or what was the top 100 songs in 2015? We just want to know things all the time, right? But there are other situations, like we go to the doctor's office and we want to understand what kind of jargon are they using. We need clarification. We're paying for something at the store and we're like, is this price right? We're going on a date and we want to get to know that person better. There are lots of situations outside of just academia, research, reporting, in which we are always looking for information, right? And I mean, this is kind of obvious, but clearly in a weird roundabout way, I'm going to ask a lot of questions to talk about how to ask good questions. And I want to clarify too that I don't think there's such a thing as like right or wrong questions. I think that as long as you're being curious, you know, sometimes people might have a weird reaction and you think like, oh, maybe that was the wrong question. However, I think then I, as a reporter, am like, if they have like a weird reaction to me asking a question, then my gut feeling is, why are you being defensive? What are you trying to hide? What is actually going on here? So then it just sparks a whole bunch more things in me, and then I go down a whole rabbit hole, right? And so I want to kind of break this down. So whenever I'm looking into a story, the first thing I want to find out is what's going on. Say there was a burglary, okay? Who has information about what's going on? Probably the police. They probably sent me some information in a press release. But then, are they right? Maybe they're the ones who have the most official information, but what about the person who was burglarized? What about, I don't know, if they think that they lost, you know, $1 million worth of stuff, well, how are they guesstimating that? Was it like because a piano got stolen? Well, how much is that piano actually worth? And then you go on this whole trail, right? And so how do we get what we need? And part of this is I'm trying to pull up, I had sub-notes, and I'm gonna get there. I'm not gonna get there, I'm sorry. So how do we get what we need? So we have to figure out what the question is, right? So So I want to try to talk about a few techniques to make that a little bit easier. So normally you ask a question, someone gives you an answer, and maybe it's not what you were looking for. So what's the best way to kind of get around that? As a reporter, that happens all the time. So I end up asking them, can you explain that to me one more time? Or, I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you right. Can you explain this part of it? Or, you know, they might talk a little bit more, and then I'll just say, oh, really? And I'll like say their answer back to them. Your cat ran out of the gate? And then hopefully they like say more about what happened, if that was the question or the answer. So rephrasing that question, right? That's one way to get to figure it out. Asking follow-ups, right? So you ask, so say you're on a date and you say, what's your favorite hobby? Oh, well, I really like skateboarding and I like watching movies. And then you don't just immediately go, what's your favorite food? You say like, oh, you like skateboarding? Ooh, like, where's your favorite place to go skateboarding? Or movies? Ooh, I really like that Quentin Tarantino movie. What did you think about it? Maybe we could go there if the date's going well. Things like that, right? So follow-ups, listening, being present during whatever conversation you happen to be having. And then the last thing I had, there were 3 things, and I cannot think of the last one, so I'm sorry. So how do we get what we need? Those are a few different ways. And then what do you do with that information? So you've asked your questions, you've asked your follow-ups, you listened really well, you maybe spent like 20 minutes with that person, and now what? Well, maybe you were asking questions of your teacher, and now it's time to go write that paper. Or maybe you were taking notes in like a Word document because you were doing a bunch of research. Whenever I ask people questions, I actually take tons and tons and tons of notes on my phone. I feel really bad because I think people think I'm texting. I'm not. I'm just like typing at lightning speed in the Notes app because it won't get damaged, hopefully. It saves in the cloud, and unlike my notepads, it's not going to get smudged when I inevitably like spill my water bottle on it, which has happened to me multiple times. So make sure that whenever you're asking questions, you've got somewhere to put it down. Say you're calling up the doctor's office to make an appointment or ask about following up on something you had to do. The easiest thing that can happen is you call them up, they tell you whatever happens, you say, okay, can you explain that? And then you just hang up and you immediately have no idea what just happened. That happens to me a lot. So I actually just have paper all over my desk, and I just am constantly grabbing pens and just scribbling down notes. But I recommend, this is a lifelong skill, you should have something semi-organized, so like a notepad just right by your phone, or I know it's not like we have phones on our walls anymore where you do that kind of thing, but if it's like your phone, you've got your headphone in one ear and you're listening and you're talking and you're just like tap, tap, tapping away, that's one way to do it. And then hopefully you end up, you know, spreading it, writing a blog, or now your appointment is in your calendar, or you've written that paper and now you are all good. And so then another thing I wanted to talk about is what even makes a good question asker. I definitely don't run into interviews and just start shouting, who, what, when, where, and why, tell me everything. I have 10 minutes because I'm on a deadline, go. I certainly like, first of all, there's a lot of prep that goes into these things. I have to end up doing a lot of research. But at the same time, you know, have you ever been told it's not what you said, it's how you said it? Like maybe you made a rude remark and you were like, but it was true, and your parent says, it's how you said it. Anybody this familiar to, kind of, some of you guys, I'm sure it's happened to you. It's happened to me. So oftentimes I kind of just go into situations with a lot of curiosity. I'm a naturally curious person, especially because much of my job is talking to people who are like experts in one field and then talking to people who are experts in another field and then trying to figure out how everything melds together. And so I just kind of have to have this open mind. And sometimes it helps to, even if I know a little bit about the subject, it helps to kind of act like I don't know anything, because then it's like, oh wait, like how does that work? And then they're prepared hopefully to ask me to answer more of what I want. So my first tip about what makes a good question asker is just kind of basic, but like being polite. Just going in and saying, hey, I need to know this thing. I feel confident you might have this information. And at the end of all of my interviews, I actually end it with, is there any question I didn't ask you that we should have talked about? Or I end up saying, especially if they say like, I can't help you, and you've tried to, say, well, how about we do this? How about we do this? And they just say like, no, I can't talk to you. Then what I often end up doing is saying, who else can I talk to? Who do you think actually has the answers to my problems? I feel like this happens a lot when I was in college and I was trying to get answers about like financial aid and weird random bureaucracy stuff that happens, because when you go to college, or even when you're dealing with like anything semi-bureaucratic, seemingly people will try to brush you off, and I don't really know why. And it happens to me as a reporter. I'll call up an organization and say, hey, I need to talk to someone about this thing. And then, like, because I'm writing a story, and the person on the phone will say, yeah, that sounds really interesting, but I don't know. And I'll be like, okay, like, but who can talk to me about this? And it's kind of awkward for a second, because for whatever reason, they don't think like, oh, but Sylvia down the hall knows. And so I have to like kind of push them. And so asking questions is like a really, can be a really polite way to just kind of move things forward and just be like, oh, but I'm sure maybe you know who else. Can you help me out here? Another thing that makes a good question asker, actually listening. So I mentioned that already, but just when someone is talking, like being present, if you know that, you didn't get enough sleep and you're going to fall asleep when you are about to go and meet up with, like, I don't know, say you have a job interview and you are getting asked questions and you're just like, okay, crap, I have to come up with questions to ask them later. Maybe chew some gum, tap your foot, and just like take a lot of deep breaths, because you need oxygen. And that'll help. Just pay attention. Try to be actually kind of invested in what they're saying. And then doing a little bit of research. It's a lot easier to know the answers if you have a bit of an idea of what direction you're going. And so that's where the internet comes in, being able to ask that in advance. But I often find, calling someone up and getting connected to the right person is the fastest way to figure things out. So you never know if you don't ask. I would say you've probably heard people say ask for forgiveness and not permission, but in my line of work, I try to ask for permission first, because you just don't want to step on any toes. Sometimes I'm covering politics, and I honestly, for whatever odd reason, like, I don't want to get in trouble with this politician or that person, or I want the city council to actually let me cover them. So the easiest way is to just say, oh, well, can I cover this? Can I talk to you? Can I get this information? You have something I need, so let's talk about it. And I want to say too, when you're asking questions, when you're seeking information, you can compromise. You can ask, you can negotiate, you can try, and if whatever you're asking initially gets flat out rejected, you can say, well, how about this? I do that a lot, and you probably hear the word negotiate. Maybe you don't. You guys are in high school. But when it comes to like your salary, was what I was gonna say. But in conversation, you can negotiate too, and try to figure out how do you get what you need, and how do you respect whatever it is that that person is concerned about. And so, in my situation, like, sometimes people don't want to talk on the record, and so I say, well, can you just give me background information? Or maybe someone is like fearing for their safety, and so I say, oh, well, maybe we can do this, like, we can talk about granting you anonymity. Well, there are ways to work around these things. I feel like in the conversations you might have, it's really just more about kind of being creative. So I don't know, for example, you're trying to meet up with someone, it's just super not working out, and they just say like, this back and forth is taking too long, I don't want to do this anymore, and you just got to find a compromise, figure out a way to work with them, and also just, like I said, being curious, being kind of polite and gentle, and just saying, hey, like, I really need this thing, can you please help me out? Please and thank you go a long way, I've found. And at the end of the day, always thanking people for the time that they've given you. People take like 30 minutes out of their day, like constantly, to just answer my questions, sometimes an hour, sometimes longer. And I am always very surprised that they will do that and that I'm getting paid to just be nosy. But it's really nice because I learn a lot, and I try to just go into things as open-minded as possible. And I think even if you don't want to be a reporter, if you don't want to go into academia where you're just trying to answer random questions all the time. This is the kind of thing where, like I said, we kind of threw out all these different examples in which you will need to ask questions. I think asking questions and like being confident in your ability to get information is really empowering, right? Because you hear people say knowledge is power. I had a professor who once said knowledge is potential power. It doesn't do anything for you if you don't use it. So, you know, if you don't do all this research and then write your paper, your grades go nowhere. Or if you don't ask questions so that when you're at the doctor's office, you are ready to, you know, do whatever they say or ask them questions and kind of like follow up, then you might just be kind of in the dark about what just went on. I know that happens because it just can be really intimidating sometimes to be around experts and they're just kind of using jargon and you're just like, I have no idea what just happened. I think especially as you go from high school with your really cool teachers who hopefully are like on your level into college and the real world where you have to start buying a car, paying rent, doing those really basic lame things. It can get really overwhelming. You get caught up in like how exciting it is, like, oh, I'm living on my own, I'm paying rent, oh, I'm paying for this, but all of a sudden, like, you know, you don't exactly know how much this costs and you don't exactly know, did you just sign up for a credit card and you don't exactly know, am I still paying for Hulu when I don't want that? So being able to be aware of what is going on, asking questions, so am I paying for Hulu? Let me call up Hulu and ask and then tell them to cancel it or whatever it's gonna be. Those kinds of things you just need to, I mean, I don't want to say like you need to just have confidence in yourself, but feeling confident in your ability to get to the bottom of it is kind of what I'm trying to get at here. So, all in all, I 100% have confidence in you all to ask questions, find information. I'm guessing this is a mix of juniors and seniors, so this is clearly not the end. It is also the beginning of the year, so you have a whole year to ask tons and tons of questions and just drive your teachers nuts. And when they say, I gotta leave, say, oh, well, can I just pick this back up tomorrow? And hopefully they'll say yes, they have to be here tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday, so there you go. To kind of close out, I wanted to point out that also at the same time, when it comes to life things, or when it comes to certain things, the answer is kind of certain, like, who won this war, who won this basketball game? Yes, there is an answer. But when it comes to life things, the question I ask myself all the time is like, am I doing this right? And I have no idea because there's no like right answer, or I'm sure there will hopefully be like a TOK presentation on like, what is truth? What is right? What is wrong? Morality. And so I wanted to point out that for me, the journey I got to get to my job was extremely confusing, and I made this with all these weird arrows because I didn't know what I was doing the whole time. And even though Miss Orgel read my bio with a bunch of cool internships and traveling and things that I am really proud of, I had no idea when I was in college that I would get this kind of a job, which is extremely exciting, but I definitely had a lot of moments of like, I think I'm doing the wrong thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing now. I guess I'm just gonna plug on until the end of the semester and then I'll just figure it out. Okay. And then like when I graduated, I was just kind of working part-time jobs and thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna randomly apply for jobs and cross my fingers and hope for the best. And this is your gentle reminder that everything will work out. And I'm only 6 years older than you-ish. And things are going fine. There were a lot of like low moments and weird moments, and if you have questions about any of these specific moments, please ask. But ultimately, life kind of shakes out. I'm sure your teachers can attest. So, anybody have questions for me? Yes?
What kind of topics do you usually cover?
Yeah, so I do a lot of politics and policy. My latest story is not about politics and policies. It's about an actor from Bakersfield who's in Hamilton. So that was fun. But I know it's so super random, but I was really excited. And this was a perfect example of like, I got to just ask him if I could interview him, and he said yes. So when you're a reporter, you get to do random stuff like that sometimes. but I've like done different stories about homelessness. That's a pretty hot topic at the city council right now. I cannot recall. I think I did a story about there's a museum in Hanford that the city wanted to revoke its lease, and that was kind of a bummer. But they didn't revoke its lease, so there you go. Spoiler alert. But yeah, just different things. I mean, we are a really small news team at Valley Public Radio, and so it honestly just depends on what's going on, and if there's any. Sometimes it depends on what's going on, and if someone wants to, can cover it. It doesn't always fall in straight lines of, oh, she's just covering immigration, she's just covering health, and Laura's just covering politics. It gets shaken up. So, yeah, if you have story ideas, let me know. Yes?
When asking questions, do you do your research, or are you just like in the moment?
Both. So I usually have a list of questions so that I kind of have an idea of kind of how I want to go from one conversation to the other. So since it's the most fresh in my mind, for example, when I was interviewing this actor, I asked him about playing this character, and then eventually kind of said, well, tell me how growing up in Bakersfield kind of led you to theater, and what was that like? And so I try to kind of keep the interview organized, I guess, thematically. And that way it just flows a little bit better. It's a bit easier. I usually know, like, maybe I want to ask this broad question to get to this finer point. But at the same time, if I'm listening and paying attention, I'll inevitably end up having follow-ups and saying, like, wait, can we go back? Or, oh, you know, at the end of the interview, I'll inevitably think of something that, like, wasn't on my list at all, and go down a kind of tangent and say, like, can you talk about this for a second? So, but I usually have an idea. Sometimes I will just call not random, but I'll call people up and say, hey, I think I want to do a story about this environmental thing. What might you know about it? And so, and those conversations are pretty broad. I'll just like have like typing at the ready and just like take a ton of notes just to get started, because I think the hard thing about being a reporter is you get a lot of information and you talk to people for maybe hours, and then I try to condense it into like a 5-minute story. So, so I usually try to have an idea to just be efficient, in short.
And even though she said she's condensing to 5 minutes, the national news condenses it to a soundbite. So it's like when you're watching TV news, it's like, you know, a sentence about this and a sentence about that. And at least with public radio, you get enough to really have a sense of the story.
I hope so.
You really do. It's very different.
Yeah, and I will say too, like sometimes I am writing a 30-second piece where it is just me explaining, the city council voted this way because this happened, and this is the next thing that's going to happen. 30 seconds, it's over. But during the week, usually I'm trying to work on a longer piece that's about 5 minutes, and it's still really hard.
Laura?
Yes, yeah.
Can you share with the students here, you know, you were an IB student here at Fresno High School, and what experiences or elements of experiences that you had here within the program that have served you to take you to where you are today?
Yeah, I think a lot about my history classes and my English class, actually all of my classes, because I was in like Spongberg's TOK class and her math class. I was in Dosetti's English class, and we did a lot of just, I remember one time Miss Dosetti, I don't know if you guys know Miss Dosetti, I hope you do. She put a picture on the wall and just said, tell me what you observe about this. And we all just stared at it for a minute or 5, I don't remember. And then we all just like threw things out there. And that was class, is we just like made these observations. And I think, and then we started to just say, okay, like, why do we think that observation exists? Why do we think that observation exists? Why do we think, so I think a lot of analysis, I definitely learned how to ask better questions. I remember being in Ms. Orgel's sophomore history class, and we talked about identifying the credibility of sources. I have to do that all the time. In that slide where I said, like, is that person right? I am constantly like, does that person have this information? Is that legitimate? I think we all could have a healthy dose of skepticism all the time. And that was something that like going into college, I was really glad that I knew better than to just go off of a Wikipedia page when I was writing my paper, right? So different things like that. There were just a lot of really practical skills. And also, if you happen to be doing the IB program and writing an extended essay, just writing a really long essay was extremely helpful, because when you're in college, I mean, you will inevitably, I think, get saddled with something like that in an upper division class. And just being able to write and communicate, I came into college with that skill down pat. Clearly it has paid off, because that's what I do every day for work in real life. I didn't think I would want to do this, because I honestly was always like, writing papers is the worst. But clearly some part of me just finds like extreme joy, because it's not the, like the researching and the sitting at a computer wasn't super fun for me in high school or college, but going out and talking to people and getting to ask them questions, and just having like a reporter badge means people will answer you. And if they don't, you can just say, okay, and you just move on to the next person, and hopefully they will. And it's one of those things that I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to do this, you know, for real life. This is super cool. But it's also kind of scary, because I just have no idea what I will run into. So I don't know. I hope some of you can identify with some of these skills, like just making random observations and pulling something together, or learning about the credibility of sources. And if you haven't done that yet, obviously Orgil could tell you about it. So yeah, it's been valuable. Yes?
What did you do for your community project?
You're scamming ideas right now.
Yeah.
CAS was set up a little bit differently, but
Yeah.
you still had to do something that you were in charge of, basically, for CAS.
I'll be honest, I don't remember. Sorry. Maybe I blocked that part out.
Essay, though.
I remember that extended, yeah.
What was your extended essay on?
Oh, I don't want to say it was really bad. Anyway, you can all do better, and I highly believe in you. Anyone else? Yes.
Did you get the diploma then?
Yes, I did. So clearly I did it right. Yeah, and if you guys have questions about college too, like that was a really hard decision for me as well. So yes. Oh, sorry, you had a follow up.
Do you ever feel restricted only talking to people in this area?
Actually, no, because by the time I graduated and got into this job, I realized there's literally, like, I grew up 2 blocks away from here. My parents still live over there, and there's a lot that I don't understand. Fresno has some of the most, I guess, crazy, like, so, how do I say this? Fresno has some of the richest and poorest people in California. Maybe that's surprising, maybe it's not. Some communities in this area don't have clean drinking water. I didn't know that. I didn't know, you know, just how difficult life is for some people. And because I grew up a very middle class background and never really wondered, like, am I going to go to college and different things like that. And so in some ways, yes, because I definitely went to Fresno High and thought I was going to go to college away and move away and do a whole big other thing. But I'm really glad that I ended up staying in. That's a good question. Yes?
Did, like, when you went to college, did they recognize your IB diploma? Like, was it something significant to them?
Good question. I think that I did get out of maybe 2 classes, 2 or 3, and I want to say it's more because I didn't, I think it's scored out of 7 and I needed to get a 5 or a 6. And I think I didn't, but I got a 4, which was passing. Does that sound familiar? Okay.
4 is passing, but a lot of them, they went 5.
Okay, yeah, and I would say only a handful of courses and / tests I got 5s on. However, I would say luckily for me, because I did SMIT camp, I had priority registration. Like the reason I would say that you like want to be able to skip out on classes is because it's just really hard when you're a freshman and a sophomore to get the classes you need. And if you have credits from high school that say technically you're a higher grade, and you're not an incoming freshman, you're an incoming sophomore or a freshman with some credits, then that for whatever reason changes when you get to register for classes. So all that to say, okay, I got out of a couple classes, but it really didn't matter because other things considered, I was fine. And I liked the general education classes I ended up taking. I think much as it's like, oh, you want to get that out of the way and move on, I think that's a really good opportunity to try out other things. I wish I'd taken more just random classes in other departments that I like didn't know about, and just experienced a lot, because like I think that's like number one advice: try a lot of things in college, because there's a lot of free things, a lot of discounted things because you're a student. Sure, you're like a college student, so you're feeling like you're super poor, but you can kind of make it, and you can meet a lot of interesting people that way.
And I want to say too that you don't get a ton of college credit unless you get like 30 on the diploma. But what really happened was when we started out and Fresno State didn't know as much about the IB, they were a little iffy about it. But as they started getting people in the SMIT camp program that had the IB diploma, by the time that you showed up, that was a huge asset, and I think that was one of the big reasons she got into the Smith camp.
Gosh, I hope so.
Is because of being a full diploma student, and they have learned that Fresno High IB full diploma people are going to make it, and they're going to do a really good job, and they're going to represent Fresno State well.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Laura helped teaching that.
There you go.
What scholarship did you get to not be in student debt?
Smith Camp Family Honors College, that probably opens up in maybe this month, maybe next month, and then I want to say closes in November, but I don't quite remember. Yeah, Smith Camp, look it up. It's really good. It's just Fresno State, but depending on your situation, there's a lot of various full rides. Like if you, maybe Smith Camp is the only one that's good for any major. But if you're interested in engineering, there's one called Husband Boeing. I think there's a Craig School of Business one if you think you want to be a business student. There's definitely, the Fresno City College has an honors program that I think helps you out a little bit. I was going to do that and then I didn't, so I don't really know. But your counselors have all those answers. Or you could call up someone from the school and ask questions. There you go. Wow, look at this full circle. Anyone else? Yeah.
On your chart, it said computer science. Did you
Yeah.
go into that, or
Did I want to go into it?
did you want to go into
Yes.
being a reporter?
Yeah, that's what I had my major declared as when I was a freshman. And then it was super hard and I was bad at it. So this is all true, 100%. I got some really bad grades, and I was like valedictorian at Fresno High, so it was like a shock to my system to be like, I don't know. I think it was a combination of things. I didn't want to, it was extremely hard. Like I didn't understand it. I didn't have very good relationships with my teachers in the computer science program. And like at Fresno High, I always had. So I think that was also part of it, but it was not good. So I ended up changing my major to mass communication and journalism, and then slowly went into reportering from there.
Do you ever think about it? Like go back and be like, I wonder how my life would have been.
Yeah, totally. I think about it a lot. I mean, part of it I think too is my roommate in my apartment is an engineering student, and so she talks constantly about circuits and programming, and she, is doing internships with Toyota and like helping them build the next generation of cars. And I'm like, wow, you're so impressive. You make me feel bad. But at the same time, I'm also like, I love that being a reporter means you do kind of get, like what I think endeared me to computer science and just technology in general, and thinking about like the cutting edge and the next thing, and like I always will kind of be really interested in like sci-fi and things like that. But I mean, honestly, the thing about reporting is you just kind of have a heart for communicating stuff, and then you can take it wherever you want. So like if I wanted to, I could potentially start carving out like a technology and the next generation of that kind of thing beat. It probably wouldn't be here. I would end up like working in Silicon Valley. But there are reporters who cover it, and then they get to try out these weird things. Or I mean, if I ever didn't want to be a reporter, Google needs people to market their products or to write up the descriptions of their products. Maybe I could do that. So sometimes, in short, but it was super not a good fit for me. And that's something you'll learn in college, is what's a good fit and what's not, and it's okay to change your major like 5 times.
I noticed you had internships in government.
Yeah.
Are you thinking thinking maybe politics someday? Or are you thinking
It's not
move
gonna show
on
up.
to NPR?
So,
Famous?
yeah.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, great question. So I actually did those internships because I thought I would want to write politics as a reporter. I just didn't know what else I would be able to do. I literally didn't know how a bill became a law. Does anybody here know how a bill becomes a law? Okay, cool. It's hard. And so I was just like, Fresno State has a couple really good legislative internship programs. One of them is called the Maddie Institute. So that's how I went to Sacramento. And then there's this crazy legislative intern program called the Panetta Institute. You all probably don't know who Leon Panetta is, but he was kind of a big deal, worked for multiple presidents, and is from Monterey. And once he essentially retired from politics, somehow I think he and his wife just donated a bunch of money to create this institute where they picked a student from every CSU, there's 23 I think, and then 3 private colleges, and sent them to DC and like paid for everything. I lived in a long-term stay hotel across from the Pentagon. I got a stipend every month. Oftentimes when you work for politicians, if any of you are ever interested in doing legislative internships, you're working for free. And DC is not cheap. And it honestly, in my opinion, really perpetuates a cycle of just people from varying socioeconomic backgrounds being unable to break into jobs in politics. And then there isn't that diversity of backgrounds like informing our legislators. So it was like really wonderful that I did not expect that going to Fresno State I would get like a full ride internship to DC where I like didn't pay for any of it. So that was amazing, and yet another way that I learned even more about politics and got to move away from Fresno for a little bit, which was kind of what I wanted the whole time. And then I realized DC is like super intense. Honestly, any big city is really intense compared to Fresno. So that's why I did those, which was really great. I'm really glad I did. Yes?
How do you find sources, outside of the official story?
Yeah.
So there's a city program, but you want to talk to the people it might affect, or
totally.
Businesses, customers, but that's kind of proprietary. So.
Yeah, I mean, great question. So oftentimes I say I know like where this plan is going, like the region. I might just like go to a public park and be like, hey, you live here. What do you think about this? And oftentimes people don't really have any thoughts about it because they're like busy living their lives and hanging out with their kids. But I might like give them a little more information and then be like, I mean, I don't know, like based on what I've kind of told you, like what do you think? Sometimes I rely a lot on advocacy groups. There's a lot of like environmental justice groups, a lot of people who are really interested in just, supporting minority groups, things like that. They have various names. One of them is like Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Like the Dolores Huerta Foundation always has opinions on things. Various, groups like that. I will often say like they are doing, to some extent, they'll like have boots on the ground people like going around and trying to like engage voters or engaging residents. And so I might reach out to them and say, do you have a family you're working with that is affected by this thing, or do you know of someone who is affected by this thing? Yeah, what you mentioned about like businesses and their customers, businesses might, if you kind of say like, oh, are you sure? Can you, I don't know, like sometimes it might just be a matter of them going to someone and saying like, hey, I've got this reporter, but oftentimes, yeah, they're not interested in doing that. And so it might just be like doing a lot of research and trying to figure out like, who uses that product, and then maybe going through like union groups or labor groups, things like that. Like when the government shut down and I was trying to talk to like IRS employees, I ended up going through the labor union, partly because nobody else really felt comfortable talking to me. They were kind of like, oh, I want to have my job at the end of the day, when this shutdown is over. But the labor unions are often they're like the ones yelling the loudest, so they have like the most to say, and they kind of have an agenda. But at the same time, like they were able to connect me to some real people.
I used to go to
Facebook, there you go. Yep, sometimes Facebook. Yes.
When is it good I call it a report, or just when you publish something in general?
Oh yeah, I just call it a story.
How would you keep yourself unbiased with your own opinions on politics?
That's a great question. Yeah, I try to, first of all, who are you talking to? Are you only talking to one person, or are you talking to multiple sources, right? So that's the first thing. Make sure you're talking to people who are on all sides of it, and then publishing what they say, doing my best to kind of fact check what they say. I also literally had a story about this last week where I was like, I knew this person was simultaneously writing his online news site and working for somebody's mayoral campaign, and I was like, wait a second. So I kind of like tried to have, like, as a reporter, I was like, I'll say it, like, kind of biased, thinking, wait, like, I truly don't think you can do that, but I couldn't write this story like guns a-blazing, like, this is wrong. So I talked to someone outside the situation, and I went to a journalism, like, industry professionals group, and I said, what would you do in this situation? And we have codes of ethics that say, you know, because ultimately, yeah, if you think that I am biased, then you're not going to trust my reporting, or you're going to, we talk a lot, you know, I'm sure you have heard the term fake news and biased media, right? But for the most part, like, we try to avoid that by, like I said, asking multiple sources and just avoiding a perception of bias. So for me, that includes not registering for a specific party as like a voter. Like, I do vote, but I don't have a party preference. Things like that.
Do you ever feel like it like weakens your own opinion?
No, actually, I think, I mean, I would say in general, like, I try not to have an opinion because I can't let it show in my writing, right? Like, when people ask me questions, I try to say, like, well, let's think about it this way, or let's think about it this way. And I just try to, like, play devil's advocate and get a lot of different sides, because I know also that hearing different people's thoughts on it too will make me think different things, and we'll have hopefully a good conversation. And then hopefully that'll carry over into my work, where I write something thoughtful and just from multiple sources, so that whoever's reading it, especially if they are someone who doesn't have an opinion, I want them to just feel informed enough to form an opinion, right? I don't want to persuade them of anything. I just want them to feel like, okay, I can go into this election and vote for the person I have, you know, information on, and feel will do the best job based on the information given. Yeah.
What are all your social media platforms?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I was on Snapchat, but I haven't looked at Snapchat in a long time, so I don't Snapchat anymore. That's it. I'm on LinkedIn, which is social media, but I kind of just use it to see where people work, creepily, like a stalker. And yeah, that's about it. I try really hard to keep, you know, and then I have, like, word to the wise, keep things clean on your social media. People will look. Yes.
So Laura, piggybacking on the question about bias.
Yeah.
So you're mentioning how you go to lengths to try to keep bias out of your story.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how a variety of sources out there aren't always necessarily as conscientious about keeping bias out of their reporting?
How sources are not conscientious of keeping bias?
How there is a, when we look at a variety of news sources,
Mm-hmm.
That there are some that are
More biased?
more slanted
Sure.
to one direction or another.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think what's really fundamental to understand is that there's reporting, and then there's opinion and columns. So, for example, there's a columnist at the Fresno Bee. His name's Merrick Wazowski. I don't know. His last name is a lot of syllables and consonants, so I don't know. But he often writes columns where he does do some reporting, and but he's putting forth kind of an idea and an opinion. But the Fresno Bee, I would say, is a reputable newsroom. They, you know, their reporters don't go and, like, for the most part, as I understand it, do not write columns at the same time. They just keep it separate. And, like, I'm a reporter, like, I never write my opinion as like Laura's opinion piece. Like I just don't, because then people would know that I have opinions and I'm trying to be not opinionated. And I think like when you're, like the most blatant example is Fox News. When you're watching people like on TV talking, I think for the most part they are giving opinions and they are people who are commentators. And that's the thing that you really need to keep in mind when people are saying, you know, well, we think this and we think that, and in some cases it sounds really outlandish, but people take it to heart, and I think they're not realizing that that's commentary, or maybe the news site just isn't identifying it as commentary, which is extremely dangerous. So, I mean, I don't know, unfortunately I don't have like a list of all the kind of biased news sites. There are certainly some that are like more right-wing than others, like I think Breitbart or maybe the Daily Stormer, different things like that. But I think the best thing I can say is like, honestly, if you Google them, sometimes I'll see something that seems outrageous and I'll just Google it. And like, not that you should accept everything Wikipedia says, but sometimes even like the Wikipedia page that pops up will say like a right-wing blah, blah, blah. And then I'll think, okay, like I'm gonna think twice about what I might be seeing here, or a left-wing blah, blah, blah. And I just, like I mentioned earlier, having a huge dose of skepticism with everything you read. And I think at the same time, you want to be extremely careful about what you are reposting if you guys are on social media, because I think that's kind of what's really scary is like people are reposting information that is not true or that is an opinion and they're not identifying it as opinion. And so it just kind of, I mean, we just end up in kind of cycles of like misinformation. At the same time though, it's shown that we are more likely to be friends with people who think like us. And so if you see, you know, 5 friends posting the same thing and you think it's true, you still want to kind of be skeptical, because it's possible that maybe you just happen to have a lot of friends who are politically motivated in the same way. So just be wary.
Do you have good fact-checking sites besides, say, Snopes, which I think most people know?
That is pretty, yeah. Honestly, I just do a lot of like trying to go back to like first, you know, to just documentation. Like, oh, what does this bill say? Is that true? And then just calling up the bill's author and saying like, this isn't extremely clear. Can you explain? And just asking other people like, what does that mean? Because I don't know, or that's not clear, and I don't think a reader would understand if I were to use the same words you used, which is a lot of my job, is just kind of taking what someone says and then trying to rephrase it in a way that is more palatable and adding context. Yes?
Would you keep that same like unbiased nature even if it was like on something that would affect you in the future?
As much as I possibly can. I mean, yeah. I would say, because like I could, for example, I don't know, like I have a really, I would probably call myself an environmentalist, and I take my reusable cup to Starbucks all the time, but oh, the state of California has decided that disposable cups are all we can use. No more reusable cups, they are not sanitary. And I would probably still just like try and live my life and like not, you know, post up a storm about it, because ultimately, like, I don't want to be barred from covering something. If it was something that I really, really cared about, I don't know. Like, I even like don't donate to political campaigns. I don't donate to nonprofit groups that have like a specific intent. If I worry that someone's going to see it and then think I'm not biased, I mean, I honestly try, like, this is one of those things, I honestly sometimes wonder, like, I worked for 2 Democrats. Both of those legislative internships were Democrats, and cause sometimes I'm like, people are gonna say I'm biased and blah, 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 even though, like, I know in my heart, the reason I did that was because I knew I wanted to be a reporter. Like, I didn't even do it thinking like, I'm such a staunch Democrat. I did it to learn more. So yeah, ultimately, like, no, I just wanna be able to cover as many things as possible. Maybe when I get, maybe later down the line, but at this point in my career, I've been doing this for 2 years and I want to do it like for like 40. So I might as well not pigeonhole myself.
There are agencies that will evaluate news sites too, because if, Fox News would say that NPR is completely 100% liberal bias, but the people who evaluate news sources would actually give NPR an enormously fair rating, that they cover multiple sides. And so, you know, I don't remember who the raters are, but you can find that online as well.
And I think too, I think sometimes that opinion comes from less the way that coverage is done, and more like what NPR wants to focus on. There's a lot of stories about social justice and you know, immigrant rights and things like that, and like you know, the humanity of kind of the situation at the border and things like that. And I think because NPR is going out and trying to talk to people trying to cross the border, talking to advocacy groups, and also talking to lawmakers who are staunchly opposed to having open borders and things like that. But the choice to even give it so much airtime makes some people say, oh my gosh, you're just a bunch of bleeding heart liberals. You know, so I would say too, like the choice of a news organization, some people would say exposes their bias, but I don't know, like my pay grade is not high enough that I ultimately decide like what is news. My editor helps me out.
It is 7 o'clock, so if anybody has a burning question, better ask it now.
Yes.
Do you read your own stories in the air? Or
Yeah, I do. So if you go online and search Laura Tsutsui, you'll hopefully find me, and you can listen to some of them. So I'll also be on the air tomorrow at 9 a.m. You will all be in class. 7 p.m. is also when it happens. 89.3. There you go. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
You said 89.3?
Yeah.